Welcome back, everyone. Encourage everyone that's still out there grabbing coffee to leave it behind and come back into the theater because you won't want to miss this next session. We have two of the most influential voices in the world of transit joining us. Janette Sadik-Khan is the former commissioner of the New York City Department of Transportation. As one of the leading voices on urban transportation policy, Janette is internationally respected for her transformative redesigns of New York City streets and rapid implementation strategies that are being replicated today in cities around the world. Joining Janette is Thomas Prendergast, AECOM's Executive Vice President and New York Metro Chief Executive. Prior to joining AECOM, Tom served in a number of leadership roles during his 30 years at the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the largest transportation agency in North America, and most recently as Chairman and Chief Executive Officer. Please give a warm welcome to Janette and Thomas.
Hello.
So we're going to get started here with an informative dialogue. Janette and I have known each other for a very long time. So New York is known as a city that, if something's successful in New York, it's going to be successful anywhere. The idea of congestion pricing has been around a lot longer than the recent past and what you see in the newspaper. It was a transformative idea before people even talked about transformation the way we're talking about it now coming out of the pandemic. But New York was in the forefront in congestion pricing because what it could deliver. Unfortunately, right now, there's been a lot of discussion about the pricing. How much will it cost? How will those costs be allocated? And it's all about the issue of trying to alleviate the congestion problem south of 60th Street. And we all know what that's like. Immediately before the pandemic, occasionally I would drive into New York for my daily commute to work. And it got to the point where before the pandemic it was taking me an hour to get off the island of Manhattan in the afternoon rush hour. So congestion pricing is something that New York has had in its radar screen. And it's done worldwide. 2 other cities, this would be the first city that would be done here in the United States. And Janette was part of that policy with the Bloomberg administration. And I think what's lost is we're talking so much about pricing. What are the other benefits? What are the underlying benefits and reasons and objectives for why some city would want to implement congestion pricing? And that's the question I'm going to ask Janette to talk about in terms of that underlying rationale for congestion pricing and what it could mean for New York.
Thanks. I mean, it is true. Tom and I have worked together for many, many years, both in the private sector and the public sector, and we actually worked together to establish the Select Bus Service Program, the fast buses that you see going around New York City. But first of all, I want to talk about congestion pricing. Just even the name is something like nobody wants, right? Paying for something you don't want. Congestion pricing, right? Terrible, terrible name. But when you think about it, it's really about the new valuation of the cost, the true cost of transportation, right? And these funds will also be used to improve our subway system, bus system, reduce congestion, improve air quality. But when you think about our infrastructure, right, our roads, our bridges, highways, tunnels, transit, that's the hard infrastructure. You don't really think about the price that you are paying for it. We think about the infrastructure, but not the price. And when you think about it, like, you pay for, when you use an MTA crossing, a bridge or tunnel, or a Port Authority bridge or tunnel, you pay a fee. But if you cross one of the East River bridges, you pay nothing, right? But if you're a strap hanger and you're going across the Manhattan Bridge, you pay $2.90. Whereas if you're driving, there's nothing. So the strap hanger is actually subsidizing the driver to drive to Lower Manhattan, one of the most congested areas in the city, if not the world. So why would we be paying people, subsidizing people to come into the central business district for free? It's not a smart policy. And I think that's why you're seeing cities like Milan and London and Singapore and Stockholm charge people for coming into the central business district, the most congested part of the city, in the busiest time of day. And it's really something that's about transportation equity. But as you pointed out, Tom, we've talked a lot about the pricing, but not the possibilities. You know, your old agency, the MTA, estimates that there'll be a 20% reduction in the number of vehicles that are on city streets. 20%. That's a huge transit dividend if we use it the right way. We can create more fast buses across town on 34th Street, 23rd Street, 57th Street, much like you did on 14th Street. Like, we can pedestrianize large swaths of Midtown. We can pedestrianize Lower Manhattan. We can build out more bike lanes, you know, based on the huge needs. We can do so much if we can imagine our streetscapes a little differently. But we need to act now before we start this program, because it can't just be all about sticks. We need to have some carrots.
You know, I think we need the messaging along the lines that Janette just talked about, and we need the support from the transportation and the public community at large. I think when you talk about mobility, you talk about freedom for people to be able to move about and get the work-life balance they want, I think the underlying justification of congestion pricing today is even more pronounced than it was before the pandemic. In a very short moment of time, we transitioned from a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 general workday for a lot of people in the industry, the way this system was built. Everything brought the services into Manhattan for the finance, insurance, and real estate industry, and then they would go home at night. They'd come in and go home at night 5 days a week. Today we've got people working remotely. If you can get them to come in for 3 days a week, that would be high. But we need to repurpose the streets of New York and of Manhattan in terms of how it can be used for other purposes. So congestion pricing enables that mobility to occur. What do you think is the best way to get that message out? Just forums like this, and then make sure people communicate, and especially in terms of the benefits beyond that which we saw before the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about what the opportunity is, right? I think we have talked a lot about, again, the price that drivers are going to pay. What's the toll that you're going to pay? You know, the New Jersey governor is suing to stop this charge from happening, even though 98% of New Jersey residents are not affected because they take transit or they don't come into the city. You know, and those people actually benefit who come into the city from improved transit, from improved networks, from safer streets. And so I think we need to talk about the benefits differently. You know, if you thought that we were going to have, like, imagine if we could just walk from here at the Times Center, right next to the Port Authority, and we could have like a green ribbon walk to, you know, Penn Station or Grand Central, you know, just a safer way to get around. It can be done, you know, and it doesn't take a lot of time and it doesn't take a lot of money. And I think we showed that under Mike Bloomberg's administration, right? We showed what happened if you looked at our infrastructure differently. So, you know, when I became commish, you know, our streets were like, you know, it was like Jurassic Park, you know, like they hadn't changed in like 60 years, right? And people were like, oh, you can't change New York. You know, this is the way it's always been. And, you know, Mike took a bigger view and said, you know, with his Plan YC agenda, which recommended congestion pricing, this is way back in 2007, right? And at that time, we actually had conversations like this that led to the fact that all the editorial boards supported it, the city council supported it, a vast majority of New Yorkers supported it, and yet it died in Albany. And that's a whole other chapter. That's another 20-minute talk. But I have to say that here we are now, you know, passed in 2019, the state legislature's acting on it, and it's great. But we really do need to bring that same imagination to what we can do. London actually did a big down payment before their congestion pricing program was initiated, and they had a huge increase in buses. And so they saw, once congestion pricing came in, a 30% increase in bus ridership. You know, much like you and I, we know what can happen when you repurpose the streets to make it easier to get around by bus or by bike, right? When we did select bus service, we launched, you know, 12 new service lines, which improved service for 215,000 people now had faster rides. again, it's just looking at it a little differently. We can actually deliver a transit dividend, a green dividend for the streets of New York if we act now.
Looking at it differently is a large part of the equation. Sometimes we are too close to the forest, we can't see the trees. One of the things that I also believe that your administration did and you did was you talked more than just about congestion pricing. You talked about what you could do to the city streetscape to enhance a personal experience, a better work-life balance. I'm amazed. I've lived in 2 cities that, you know, all my relatives that I didn't know were my relatives, they wanted to come visit because they wanted to see the city. One was Washington, D.C., and the other's New York. Everybody wants to come to New York. And so, you know, some of your pedestrian ways, some of your plazas. The other thing I find kind of interesting is there's a lot of pushback here about having that, yet everybody takes vacations in Europe or other places where they have these city streetcapes and outdoor cafes, and people love it, and they talk about going to those cities to do it. So a lot of those initiatives were started in your administration. And, you know, sometimes you're lucky enough to start and finish something in your administration. Sometimes you're lucky enough to have the ribbon cutting ceremony for something somebody started before you. But more often than not, you start something, but you're not there to see it launched. So do you think the city is still progressing those? Not to take it from a personal standpoint, but just advancing the dialogue on some of those mobility issues that improve the urban street landscape to have a better mobile, environmentally friendly streetscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is, you know, continues to be work to build out bike lanes. There continues to be work to invest in our transit infrastructure. I think what's really interesting is you write the future of your city in your streets, you know, and you get what you design for. And so the thing that's been really interesting is to see a lot of the success in New York translate to other cities, and actually learning a lot from other cities. You see what's happening in Paris, right? Like, they're turning into this bike and bus, you know, paradise, you know, with the biking that you see on the Rue de Rivoli is unbelievable, you know, and they have the largest transit expansion in the world going on right now. Or Milan, 40 piazzas and the new transit lines to the airport and their tram expansions. Or Bogota, you know, under Mayor Lopez has done this huge piece in terms of revitalizing their neighborhoods. Or, you know, there's so many cities that are doing so much. And I think it's very exciting to see that that same DNA, people understand you're not going to be a successful city by just doubling down on your driving infrastructure. The secret sauce of a successful city is really the transit investments. And so one of the things I think is interesting, we've been talking a lot about driving and congestion pricing, but really the heartbeat of New York City is really its transit system. And you know this better than anybody, having, you know, run the transit authority and the MTA and come up through Chicago. And, you know, I was thinking about the work that you're doing on Gateway, right? You know, fixing, you know, the tunnel that was damaged in 2012 with Hurricane Sandy, and, you know, expanding another tunnel. And, you know, this is a piece of infrastructure that carries like over 200,000 people a day into New York. And I think it's probably one of the most important transit projects in the world. I mean, do you see another project that has that?
No, I mean, the original construction of what they called the North River Tubes, there were 2 of them. They were supposed to build 2 additional ones. There's a great book out called Conquering Gotham. You ought to read it. It talks about the political, the engineering, and the social issues and the business issues of why they never built those 2 tunnels. But if New York wants to maintain its presence as the financial capital of the world, or one of the financial capitals, where 20% of the gross domestic product is right out of the New York metro region, we need to have those tunnels get built. And in a day where airline travel is going to subside over time, especially along the Eastern Corridor, and automobile traffic is going to, the critical point is getting trains in and out of New York City, whether that be for daily commuters, whether that be for tourists, whether that be for long distance travel up and down the Northeast Corridor. So we now have funding from the federal government, and now it's the job of the Gateway Development Commission, Chris Calori, to build that, the communities around it. I mean, I think one of the worst things that can possibly happen, and you talk to anybody in like in a federal administration, you get the money and then it's not spent. So we really have got to make sure that we have a focus to get that done. And it is, you also do raise a very important point, which is restoring and bringing up to a state of good repair the 2 existing tunnels that were suffered very, very heavily, and the 4 East River tunnels. And that's an important project, high on the priority list to get done. Some $14 billion, give or take $1 billion.
So when you sort of think about it, like we do have some great transit projects that have been delivered. You know, you look at East Side Access, you look at Second Avenue Subway, you look at the World Trade Center hub, right? But I often talk about how Los Angeles actually has built more rail in the last 20 years than New York City has built in the last 50 years. You know, I'm going to throw the question, you know, that you asked me about streets back to transit, like, are we doing enough to keep up with the needs of New York City? And do you see anything that's happening around the world that we should import back here to New York?
Yeah, I mean, for somebody that worked at a number of the different agencies, Long Island Railroad, New York City Transit, and the MTA, it's a loosely held confederation of states. It's not, it doesn't move all in one fell swoop, so it's a little bit difficult. And it's kind of caught in the past, because the way that the transportation system was built here, everything came into Manhattan and then went back out to one of the boroughs outside of Manhattan, because that was the commute pattern that people had. We now have a lot of intra-borough and interborough travel that doesn't touch Manhattan. So a project like IBX, which connects Brooklyn and Queens along a corridor that's a semi-used rail right-of-way, is an example of something where you could have a better, faster commute. You could couple it with land use development, whether it be residential or commercial. That's changing. The commercial side of it's changing. I think by the time our children's children graduate, there's just people in a room that don't know what it means to go saying they went to shop on the Avenue before malls were built. And then you're going to have the generation that says, what was a mall? Okay, and because everything's now point and click. You know, you go to the computer, you look, you click, and then it gets delivered to your door. But that interborough travel is something that we need to be able to accommodate, because there are a lot of people that either won't be able to have enough cars in the family to be able to transport them to work or social opportunities. They will need public transportation, and they certainly won't need to go all the way into Manhattan just to come back out to one of the outside boroughs to get there. So I'm very excited about the IBX project. I'm very excited about also accessibility at those stations. I once worked for a mentor who was probably in his 80s when I was in my late 40s, and we had an escalator out at 53rd and Lex, and it was out for a longer period of time than we committed to. And so I was in a public meeting, and I said, you know, yeah, it's going to be a couple more weeks. I said, you know, what's the big deal? And he waited till after the meeting, and he chastised me, and he says, when you get to be my age, you'll see how big of a deal that is in terms of 2 weeks. So it's the accessibility issue for stations. But those are the areas we really need to grow. Second Avenue was an important project, notwithstanding the fact that it was committed to in the 30s, the original bond issue. But before Second Avenue went into service, that's the most densely populated area in the United States. It's probably, you know, in the range of over 100,000 people per square mile in parts. That for people that were taking the Lexington Avenue line to commute to work, it was taking them 2 or 3 trains in the rush hour to be able to get on a train at a boarding station.
How long will it take us to get to 125th Street?
A while. That's phase 2, but that's badly needed for East Harlem, definitely.
Yeah. One of the things that has been so rewarding for me is actually working with you in this transportation family. And I think that we got a lot done because of the collaboration and the coordination, and I think the sort of trust. And I think that's such an important piece for getting things done in government these days. I think, you know, when you think about launching the select bus service program, when we did it, there was not a precedent for that. There was no like MTA talking to city DOT to get this done. I mean, obviously the streets are kind of the rails for the bus system, and looking at it that way collaboratively made a lot of things happen. When we were trying to make it possible for people to pay before they got on the bus, we took the fare collection machines from the subway and brought them up to the street and then made them look pretty or prettier. And that actually started a whole other generation of improvements. I wonder, what do you think needs to happen in terms of collaboration today to get to where we need to go to make the significant progress that's needed?
The leaders at a political level, the leaders that run large agencies need to have at least 50% of their mind focused on collaboration. I used it. Some people think it's a throwaway joke about loosely held confederation of states, but that's what the MTA is. But I'll tell you one thing. There's a hurricane, there's a flood, there's a disaster. Everybody coalesces around what needs to be done to take care of the people that are injured or hurt, get the system up and running, and the level of coordination is second to none. Why we can't translate that into something beyond is a challenge, but that's what needs to be done. So it has to start at the governor and mayor. It has to go down to the city agencies, and constant collaboration and communication. And without that, these critical projects won't be done.
Yeah. Well, it's a very exciting time in the city, and congestion pricing is just upon us. I don't know how many of you have seen the gantries that are around 60th Street, but the time is here and it's coming, and hopefully it will survive the legal challenges. Everything gets a legal challenge here in New York, so there's no surprise there. But it's exciting to see that we're finally at this moment. So thank you for your partnership through the years and for this conversation.
It's hard to work with someone like Janette because she brings so much low energy to the job. But I think I have high energy, but she put it on steroids when I worked with her. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janette and Thomas. Coming up next, an Ignite talk with Julie Allen of the Howard Hughes Corporation on the Web3 City. For our virtual